Hey everyone, this is Jeff Perkins. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of QASymphony. I want to thank you very much for joining us today for this great webinar featuring Keith Klain, co-CEO of Doran Jones. He's going to be talking about what testing will hold in 2016. We'll get to Keith in just 1 minute. Right now I am going to run through a couple slides for you to see. I work for QASymphony. For those of you who are not familiar with QASymphony, we are one of the large providers of software testing tools for Agile companies. So if you're interested in learning more about us, please visit our website where you can do a free trial. And actually, if you look on the screen, there's a resources module. We have some links there for you to go visit our blog or go to take a free trial of our software. I also encourage you, if you like the content in this webinar, to go and view our blog. We update it almost daily with a lot of good content about software testing. So I invite you to go check that out. I think you'll find some of that content really useful. I also want to tell you about an upcoming webinar we have featuring Kevin Dunn, who is our Vice President of Strategy and Business Development. He's going to be talking about test-first methodologies like BDD, TDD, ATDD, and how to scale those for the enterprise. So that should be a great session coming up on February 24th at 2 p.m. So I encourage you to check that out. And again, we put a link to that webinar right in the resources module, so you can just go in right now while you're listening to this webinar and sign up for the next one. So should be great. I also want to let you know about a great event we have in Atlanta coming up. On April 13th in Atlanta, we're going to have an event we're calling Quality Jam. It's a user conference for QASymphony, even though you don't have to be a customer to attend. So I encourage you to visit qualityjam.net and check that out and see if it's an interesting conference. It's 1 day, and you'll be able to go in and, we have some great speakers. We'll be talking about both some best practices for testing. We have some great thought leaders coming in, including Keith will be joining us for that event. So definitely check it out. We have an early bird pricing deal going on right now. Pricing is it's $100 for early bird. It'll be $200 regular price. And for everyone attending this webinar, you can use the code QASVIP. And we'll get you an extra $20 off Quality Jam, so about $80. And for people attending who are really interested in the webinar or in the conference, we're going to get some free passes, so we put an email address right up there, and it's qualityjam@QASymphony.com. So the first 10 emails we get, we will give you a comp pass to the event. So please only email if you're really going to attend, but we'd love to give away some comp passes to some people that are on this webinar. So a couple housekeeping items that I want to go through before I move on to Keith. So this is going to be recorded, so don't worry about if you miss a part of it. We'll send out the recording after the webinar. I'd encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter. So at the bottom of every slide, you'll see Keith's Twitter handle, and also you'll see the hashtag #Test2016. So use that, and let's get the conversation going on social media. You'll also see a resources module here, and that gives you some good links to check out. And finally, at the end of this survey, at the end of the webinar, you're going to see a survey pop up. We'd love for you to take that survey, and it'll give you just give us some good feedback on how you liked this webinar and some feedback for future webinars. So please take that if you can. So to start off today, I'm going to ask you to help us with a quick poll, and this poll is going to come up in a minute. It's really asking you, what do you think the biggest trend for testing will be in 2016? So I'm going to push this to you now. It gives you about 30 seconds to answer it. Okay. And while we're answering it, I'm going to introduce Keith Klain, who's our featured speaker today, and he's the co-CEO of Doran Jones Testing. Keith has over 20 years experience with multinational companies doing enterprise-wide testing programs. He's built global test teams for financial services and IT consulting firms in the U.S., UK, Asia Pacific. He designed the Perscalis STEP program and has been instrumental in its growth and continued expansion. He was Executive Vice President for the Association for Software Testing and the recipient of the 2013 Software Testing Professionals Luminary Award. So with that, I think you probably should have finished the poll by now. And I'm just going to put up Keith's bio. But Keith was very kind to join us last year to give us his predictions for 2015, and was kind enough to come back in 2016, both to give us his new predictions and also to look back at his 2015 predictions to see how many of those actually came true. So with that, Keith, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Hope everybody can hear me out there okay. Quick sound check if that's all right. So I'm going to quickly go through. Last year I did a talk like this with Kevin Dunn, who you mentioned earlier. And the first thing I'm going to do is briefly go through, and I think that's available on both of our websites if you want to go back and take a look at that. But I'm going to go through as we like to hold people up to scrutiny in the testing businesses. Go through and talk about what I mentioned last year, and then give myself a grading on how I did over the course of the year. So. This rating system, 1 to 5 stars, it's my own developed rating system, and I'm also self-grading myself. So with that comes the disclaimer that this is my opinion. You can go and listen to it and think of how you did yourself. So 1 or 0 stars being a completely lost the plot, to 5 stars I should be a stock picker for Goldman Sachs or some other investment firm with my spot-on analysis of the testing market. And then my other general disclaimer that I usually give when I give any kind of talk is, as one of my idols, Groucho Marx, said, these are my principles. If you don't like these, I have others. So in my context, which is generally in enterprise IT, non-tech firms building tech, this is my view of the market through marketing materials, discussions with my peers, viewing the market from other testing services providers, and then general knowledge that I look at through just kind of researching the tech industry. So with that, I'm just going to go through the predictions from last year. So I talked about certified cracks in the seams is really about the certification market, and how, in my prediction, that you're going to start to see a steady decline in that business. And unfortunately, the numbers have not really leveled off. They've gone up. If you look at places like what's happening in Malaysia right now, which are, in my opinion, becoming kind of de facto certification markets for the ISTQB and other places like that to kind of churn out cookie cutter testers. I gave myself 2 out of 5 stars on there. Although I will say there's some hope. I think in terms of the ISO 29119 effort and the kind of really consolidated exercise that, particularly coming out of the software, the context-driven testing community, to put a public record of dissent against that standard for a body of evidence to show that there is some professional opinion that differs from the ISO board, and I think the turnover at the Association for Software Testing's board, I've seen some good things happening there to try and counter some of the bad practices in the certification world. But I think, to me, there might be a defining kind of jump the shark moment with that, when you're seeing this proliferation of Agile testing certifications, which, I don't even know what that would even mean or entail. So I'm quietly hopeful that we'll see some sanity reined into the certification world. But I don't think it died as much as I would have wanted or predicted. The second point there on the rise of the context-driven testing consultant, I think actually did a little bit better. You're starting to see, even though context-driven testing is not a series of practices, you're starting to see some of what people attribute to hallmarks of that around exploratory testing, the use of heuristics are starting to get into more mainstream discussions around software testing, and not just limited to the context-driven testing community. You're seeing alternative training providers in this place. If you look at the conference circuit, I mean, the STPCon conference has virtually been taken over by context-driven testing practitioners. And I'll talk a little bit about the STAR conferences as well. They've always had a good balance, but are really loading up on people who are thought leaders in the context-driven testing world. And having started a testing practice based on those principles, I think you're seeing a more groundswell around that. So I gave myself 3 stars out of 5 on that, because I think you are seeing some evidence that those principles are starting to finally get, at least from a linguistics perspective, some traction in a broader audience. Crowd testing. I've long predicted that and again, in my opinion, the faddish nature of crowd testing. I think you've seen as well that market shift towards more kind of virtualization of automation and tools, and people using that, and a lot of the crowd-based testing providers focusing on tools these days. I still think you'll see, and from some of my market research on this, a decline in those services because one of their biggest markets that they haven't, I think, truly penetrated in a deep and meaningful way is at the enterprise level, where your heavy regulatory environments that they haven't been able to get there. So I from my inside knowledge on that, I think I did a little bit better on that one. Emotional UX, and this is something that I think you're seeing a little bit in, and I was speaking about it last year in regards to using emotions in the user experience. And I think what I saw was a twist this year where people are looking at more kind of human experience through accessibility standards, and how that is exploding into the kind of Internet of Things. And I think there's still an opportunity there with the WCAG standards and some startups as well that are looking to improve their user experience to include human emotion in that, which is something that I know my friend Michael Bolton talks a lot about, emotions in testing. So I was I'm still bullish on that, and I think that there's some great work being done by some folks in our business to address accessibility. So I think I took a little bit of a turn on that. So I gave myself, it probably should have been 2.5 stars, but I gave myself a 3. And then, the last bit is regulation, which I believe, having worked in heavy regulated environments, that there's going to have to be some broad standard put down around this. I was just trying to run up a short list of major data breaches last year, and I mean there is no such thing as a short list in this. I was Blue Cross Blue Shield, I think had over 1 million records stolen from them. Harvard University got hacked, the National Guard, T-Mobile, Scottrade. I think that the government, the alleged Chinese hack to the Office of Personnel Management, I think it was something around the nature of a little over 4 million records were stolen. And I think even Donald Trump's organization got hacked last year. That there's going to be, my prediction is there's going to be more regulation on this. I think it usually gets tagged into larger bills. I believe last year there was an executive order from the Obama administration around some standards. There's talk in India. They're in the Office of Technology around making more stringent regulation around this. But I think it's coming where there's going to be a big enough breach where you're not just getting these kind of like retail hacks where you need a new credit card that is kind of potentially be at the national security level where you're going to see regulation come in this space. So I think for that one, I was pretty spot on with predicting quite a bit of data hacks. I'm going to move on, Jeff.
Yeah, hey Keith, I just want to, that's great. So you went, I would say you went probably like 2 for 5, you'd say, on 4-star?
I went what?
You went probably 2 for 5 in your predictions as far as getting the 4-star, 4 to 5 star rating?
Yes, I would. Yeah, I would say. And again, I think I'm, when it comes to rating myself, I'm biased. But yes, I would say, it's interesting as well. I would tell people, if you really want to think about what you're going to say, make a prediction in public, and then see how easy that is, because you're basically putting a target out there.
Right. Well, it's not a bad batting average, if nothing else. But I wanted to tell everyone who's on the webinar now, and we have a lot of people here today. There's a Q&A console there, and so if you have any questions, we're not taking them live, but please type it into the Q&A console, and we'll be answering them throughout the webinar. I'll just turn back to you now, Keith.
Yep, that's great. So yeah, I'd say roughly 50%. Depending on how they're not weighted. So yes, I would agree with you. It was okay. It's hard to do, frankly. So right. So I'm going to get into now what I think are this is the kind of more speculation part on my end as to technology trends that I think are have an impact on software testing or technology that in some way I think can relate to what we're doing. And I was reading this interesting Gartner report the other day about what, and I don't know if they derived the term, but what they're basically calling the big mesh, right? The device mesh. And this is, I would kind of call it the Internet of Things on steroids, where you've got mobile, wearables, consumer and home devices, automobiles, environmental technology, all this stuff, which is not just internet aware and storing and sending data, but now wants to interact with each other. And I think the kind of cooperation between those devices and how they mesh together, communication, data, all that is, if you look at just integrating wearables into mobile devices, or some people have been talking about being in a post mobile era we're moving into. As some of the things I was reading today, that a new version of the Apple Watch is going to come out that are going to fix a lot of the usability issues. That this has got, again, massive implications for software testing. If you're looking at how all these things integrate together, there's a lot of I think room for specialization in devices, let alone specific operating systems or technologies, and how all those things integrate together and manipulate data. I think is got a big impact on just look at from a data perspective or an environment perspective. So I think that will have a play in testing. The next point around big data made easy, and then I talked last year a little bit about big data, and that it is such a big thing that organizations are having a hard time getting their head around what is it for us. You've got, do we care about the 3 V's, right? Volume, velocity, variety. Which one of those is more important to us, and how all this stuff works together. And I think, that combines directly with this idea of this device mesh, that the explosion of devices and all this stuff trying to talk and manipulate and interact with each other, there's just something, even as an interesting article in CIO magazine I was reading about some simple things. One of the writers works with Hadoop around kind of a consolidation of the developer interfaces, and that something as simple as that would make using and being productive with big data so much easier that some of that I think is still kind of opaque to people on how to use that stuff. The next piece there is around predictive modeling, and I think when I'm talking about that from an enterprise perspective, I'm really talking about these data breaches, looking at, and we've worked with a couple companies, one specifically that does a lot of modeling around compliance issues to try and predict where there might be problems. And I think we're so reactive, and particularly from security breaches and concerns, trying to get out in front of that. It sounds very kind of thought policey, but if you start adding in elements of artificial intelligence, you start adding in once people get their head around the interfaces for big data, you really can get into behavior modeling, and I think that's going to have an impact in the enterprise, particularly in highly regulated environments like financial services that are trying to get out in front of London Whale type of trades. It feels a bit dystopian future at times, but I think they see that where that's going, which to me has a direct impact on how do we test for that. And I'll talk a little bit later about adaptive test strategies and how I think those integrate. The medical sector, there's big moves going on in there, particularly if you follow that sector around the Medicaid information technology architecture model, the 3.0, which we're actually starting to do some work on that now, it was rolled out, I believe, in 2012, but is just really now starting to gain traction with a lot of organizations at the state level in terms of implementing it. And it's got a wide-ranging impact in terms of the service-oriented architecture, integration of all public health records, interdepartment operability, like how do all these things talk together. There's a huge market being generated there that is an opportunity for testers to get some specialization in, and all that stuff is freely available. The MIDA standard is available on the web. That's got a massive implication for kind of looking at very traditionally built applications and systems that need to be tested in an integrated way. And if you are a great test manager or understand heuristic test strategies and can quickly help organizations get to speed, there's big opportunities there for testing in general or testers with that domain knowledge. And then the last point I'm bringing up here is I call insert here development. So this is design development. So this would be test or driven development, right? So this is test-driven development, behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development. I believe there's now EDD, which is example-driven development, which also I think goes by the name of SDD, which is story-driven development, which all those things I feels to me, as it did a decade or so ago around in the enterprise, opportunities to get rid of testing or do less testing, and I don't believe that's where any of the intent lies for those practices, which I all think are very, very good. I think the point is to get the right level of test automation in the most strategic places and refocus the test automation and our test approach on the customer and what the right information is we should be deriving from automation. Unfortunately, what I still see when we work with folks or when I talk to people in the industry is that at the enterprise level, it's still being used as an opportunity to cut testing or look at it. And I was just having a conversation with one of our test engineers today about trying to apply monetary return on investment models to test automation. And it's so pervasive in our business how those tools are sold and marketed that I still think that's going to have an impact on testing, which brings me to my predictions for next year, which I'm going to move on to, Jeff, unless you have any questions or interjections with my view on some trends for next year or this year.
Yeah, good. Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions in here, Keith. Here's a good one from Don from Pearson. What are your thoughts on Yahoo eliminating testing?
Well, that's actually, let's hold that, because that's actually my first bullet in my predictions for next year. Or we can move into that if you want. That might be a nice segue.
All right, maybe use that as your segue. Go for it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to move into the predictions for next year. And the first point there, more Yahoo, less of the same, which directly addresses the story of Yahoo eliminating their testers, which actually, as you dig into it a bit, I don't think it sounds like they repurposed people, but there's still testing going on. And this to me, and I'm going to put my cynical 20-year testing veteran hat on here, and I refer to this as the kind of quality pendulum where people swing back and forth between, oh, we don't have any problem, let's get rid of all the testers. Oh, we got a problem, we swing back the other way, we need more testing. My cynical hat makes me feel like that. I think, and I would need to get into the details of what they were doing before and how they actually repurposed people or renamed people, but that amount of testing is probably still going on. This is something I think is as Agile adoption takes hold in organizations, that's what I think is going on there. So they couched it in terms of, we are forcing our developers to take ownership for quality, but actually they did a continuous, in my reading of it, they did a continuous integration deployment, which a lot of the automated checking that probably the testers were doing is now encompassed by that. So I would need to get into more detail, but I think this is a storyline that you're going to see more and more. Now, there's a lot of skepticism, and if you read the blog where that was announced, it's actually really interesting. A lot of skepticism around, did they really get rid of people? Who's doing the testing that they're doing? What was the value of the testing they were doing before? Again, this buys into a tagline of, test automation, to me, does not necessarily equal value. It has to be, it has to be demonstrated. And this is, again, I think a byproduct of, some popular thinking around continuous integration and whatever driven development. But to testers, I would take that as if you're not able to demonstrate the value of what you do, people will still look at it as a commoditized thing that can be enveloped in other places. So I'm a bit skeptical. If there was a big problem with Yahoo, I'm sure they would put more testers on it. So I guess we'll wait and see what happens there. So that's my answer to that, Jeff. So the next point. Yep, the next point on crowdsourced testing, I think it's still gonna be a story, but I think now the shift is turning towards crowd being associated with low value testing, and that I still think that I'm kind of bearish on that market, and I think that it has struggled a little bit to demonstrate some of the value, and it's, as I said earlier, not penetrating the enterprise. You'll see more of those organizations focus on tools, technology, automation, as opposed to just throwing enough people at it, which is a very kind of old way of looking at software testing. If you just look, I think if you think of testing as a pure numbers coverage approach, you're going to have a bad time. And as well, I think particularly there's the value of the information that's produced by crowd testing. I would probably debate, but don't take my word for it. There's a great talk that I would encourage everybody to listen to by a colleague of mine named Doran Jones. He gave a couple years ago about what is good evidence, and he works a lot in highly regulated environments on what is good software testing evidence. I believe there's a video of it that I view that the information that comes out of crowd-based testing probably relatively low. The next point on there on actionable intelligence, I think this ties into kind of the Yahoo question around is testing giving us the information that we need to make business decisions, not just straight technology decisions, but business decisions. So being able to align test results, whether it be in an agile fashion or kind of waterfall, whatever the information that's being produced out of software testing, is it aligned towards the business? Can we make quick decisions? Particularly when we're talking about predictive modeling, how do you contribute to that? And I've talked a lot about testers being focused on their business. This is a really quick and easy way, particularly in something like financial services, which is constantly under threat from security breaches. How do you give your business information that they can make decisions on their business, not just on the technology? Because it should be a great trialing ground for that stuff. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And I think particularly as the regulatory environment, I think, tightens up, that's an opportunity for testers to really demonstrate some value beyond just doing automated checks. And I think that's an opportunity there for testers. The next bit on industry specifics, it's funny because this again swings back and forth where everyone's a specialized generalist. I think I've heard the term used before, to now you're seeing a swing towards, there's so much knowledge required in some of these industries that COEs, particularly you see that out of the big testing vendors, COEs focused on verticals and less generalization and more specialization around, verticals or business specific, or I would almost call it like service-based services, to kind of use the SOA terminology, where the testing interfaces between these two. I think you're going to see more and more people focus so much on industry that you'll see verticals within a vertical. And I experienced that a lot, working in investment banking, where we had people aligned towards equities, towards fixed income, towards different businesses that then interacted with each other when we had to do end-to-end testing. And I think that's another market opportunity you'll see people start to exploit. The next point around, and I think I'm coining this term actually today, adaptive test strategies. And this is extremely short time scales, trying to add in randomness. I won't go so far as to say, elements of AI, but being able to make very short cycles, which I think is one of the powers of using heuristics in test strategies, to make incredibly short cycles to give information to adapt to either a market event, information that's uncovered through the development process, changing regulation, that ongoing adaptation of your test strategy to give information to feed back into the business, I think is incredibly important. There's a lot of work been done in kind of market simulation in the investment banking world, that I think there's things there to be learned and applied towards other areas, that, not being reactive in your test approach and helping predict issues it sounds obvious, but when we get into the guts of a lot of these testing projects we work at, it still is very reactive and has these kind of very old coverage-based numerical models. And that I think the idea of a big regression testing pack, that value is just dropping, which I'm happy to see, actually. That's one of the great things I think about continuous integration, is that a lot of those things that could be done by machines have traditionally been done to create human firewalls in the past, and I'm happy to see that. And then the last thing I think you're going to see, and I've already seen this mentioned somewhere, is that Agile at scale suddenly means a testing COE, and I've seen that marketed a couple places already. That in order to achieve Agile at scale, which I think is relatively newish, people talking about this. I think there's a couple people, consultants working on that. But some of the kind of elements of Agile, or the practices around Scrum and things like that, somehow seem to be translating into we need to have a consolidated testing center of excellence that is then kind of interfaced with all your different Scrum teams, and I just find that bizarre. But I think you're going to see that more and more as large testing vendors continue to try and sell this kind of human scale model approach to testing. So that wraps up my predictions for next year. I'm going to move into one last thing I've added for this year, which is what I think is cool stuff for testers to check out. Oh, wait, we're going to see the results of the poll first.
And before you do that, Keith, let's take a couple questions about some people asked a lot about trends that you didn't mention. We got a bunch of questions on manual testing, and where do you see manual testing going in 2016 and beyond?
Right. So I don't think it's going anywhere, and I don't view manual testing as a bad thing or a dirty word. Or I think there's bad testing, and then there's good testing, and some testing is done without the aid of a machine. Although I don't know you could argue if any software development or testing could actually be done without the aid of a machine, because we're using a machine to manipulate applications. I mean, that's just in the general operating system. Getting on philosophical debates, I don't see that going anywhere. If you just look at it from the highest level, the software testing market, and particularly where most of the jobs are in the outsourced services software testing market, grows year after year after year. Software becomes more pervasive in our lives every year. Software is becoming more interconnected. Just again, the big mesh, the Internet of Things. I mean, that's we're just getting into how literally complete software is taking over. That stuff has to be tested. Talking about the MITA 3.0, that has massive implications for an entire sector of the U.S. economy that is using antiquated systems and processes and needs to be updated. That's going to require people who know how to test. So I think if you look at that stuff is very kind of buzzwordy bingo to me, that all testing is going to be automated, or we can automate people away, or we can stuff that can and should be automated. I'm happy to see go. I don't think that the role of a strictly manual tester, I think, has changed, as they should, and adapt to new technologies and new ideas. But I don't see that role particularly going away. The market's too big. I think one role I would like to see go away that's generally associated with manual testing is this idea of an operational test manager. And my definition of that is just a manager of managers, somebody who doesn't test, somebody who, as I like to call them regularly, the coloring in boys, who do a lot of metrics and just kind of managers. That role, I think, drives the overall value proposition of testing down, because you get into a lot of role justification. But I don't think in general manual testing there's too much work out there to do. I would encourage everybody to update their skills. If you think doing some coding is good for your prospects, that's great. You know, and I would encourage people to do that, but I don't particularly feel like that role is going anywhere.
Great. Another interesting question that came in: what's your opinion about the diminishing line between QA test environment and production environment?
Well, I think that sounds to me like a kind of Facebook, we deploy directly to live, or like what Yahoo seems to be doing is they deploy directly to live. I think if your business supports that and you've got high tolerance levels for false or great rollback procedures, I think in technology companies that makes a lot of sense, or web app companies that makes a lot of sense. I don't, you know, the enterprises where a lot of this stuff finally comes to its resting place, I have worked in a lot of places that from just a regulatory perspective in enterprise can't do that. But that's, I think, a business decision. I'm not pro or, you know, for or against that. I think that's a business decision, and if you can deploy code quickly and roll back quickly, that's great. And some business environments require that. So that I don't have an issue with that at all. In fact, I'm struggled through my career with dedicated test environments, dedicated dev environments, because they support, in my experience, they support the kind of throw it over the wall mentality. So I think you make decisions for your business, but I'm probably a bigger fan of shared environments.
Great. Why don't we move on?
Okay. So I'm going to get. You want to talk about the poll results?
Yeah. So we got some the results in here. I think almost half of you that are on the webinar took it, and it looks like the biggest trend in testing for 2016. I think the winner by far looks like testing in Agile and DevOps environments. Keith, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's probably on trend. You know, it's, you know, as Agile gains traction and popularity and gets into the larger organizations, you know, it's been around for years in kind of a buzzwordy way, but as I think it gains more traction, that you're going to see that out in job adverts and job descriptions. So that's probably, you know, that's probably right on trend.
All
okay,
right.
so I'm going to
move on to your cool stuff.
Yeah, let's go on to cool stuff here. So this is stuff that I think, and I'm always a big fan of encouraging testers to understand their industry, to be self-educated, to take ownership of learning about stuff. So this is some stuff that I think is cool and important, and I follow and read. One of them is a new YouTube channel, and they're on Twitter as well. It's by some great minds in software testing. A gentleman, Richard Bradshaw, and another gentleman, John Stevenson, put out these short videos. They just started, so I'm rather, knowing both of them, I'm rather bullish on the material that's going to be continued to produce. I hope they do continue, but there's great stuff on there already. Really quick videos on different testing models, things like integration testing, automation, that you can watch really quickly and get some great information from. The next one on there is fantastic, two of the sharpest minds in software testing right now. And if you don't want to hear, I'm not on any of it, so if you don't want to hear me talk, it's a great place to go. So that's gentlemen Steve Janaway and Dan Ashby, who are fantastically funny and great. It's a webinar. I think it's a podcast. I think it's available on iTunes as well. It's called Testing in the Pub. That's Dan's Twitter tag there. We can send out Stephen's later if we want. But they talk to people like Duncan Nisbet, Tony Bruce. They talk about mobile testing, automation, security testing, lots of great stuff from people who are pros at this that you can quickly use and assimilate into your job. I would encourage people, and not just because I'm going to be at it, but Star East this year is going to be killer. If you can get down there, May 2016 over in Orlando is going to be great. We've got, I'll be there, Paul Holland's going to be there, Dawn Hayes, James Bach, John Bach, Michael Bolton, Rob Sabb, Rob Sabrin. All these, I mean, it is going to be a powerhouse of great minds in software testing, and there's a whole other raft of people as well. It's going to be a fantastic conference this year, and just I'm more looking forward to the kind of over a beer conversations that are going to happen down there. So that's a great thing to check out this year, and they do a fantastic webinar as well. You can watch some of the keynotes. I like to always give people a book, and I'm going to give this one courtesy of a good friend of mine, Martin Hinier. It's called Trading Zones and Interactional Expertise, written by a guy, I think he co-edited it, but Michael Gorman. It's really about cross-discipline collaboration, and I've talked a bit about this idea from Harry Collins around interactional expertise and being proficient in the language of something without being proficient in its practice, and how that can greatly help test managers or testers in general learn how to articulate your value to your business. I think test managers, project managers, really who are interested in aligning their work to the business should read that book. And bonus for everybody, Martin actually talks a bit about it in a live talk that you can watch on the Ministry of Testing's dojo. I think you just need to sign up and get the video there. And I think that talk is called "What's in the Name? Experimenting with Testing Job Titles" by Martin, who's another fantastic mind in the software testing world. And then the last thing I would encourage, if you not knowing a lot of you out there, is Rapid Software Testing, a wealth of knowledge between James Bach, Michael Bolton, and Paul Holland around heuristic test strategies, how to really think about the testing problem. And I would encourage everyone to get out on the Satisfice website, the DevelopSense website, do some training. All their courses are listed out there, and there's tons of resources there. So one of the underpinnings of our approach to software testing at Doran Jones is rapid software testing. So I'm always a big advocate of that. So please check that out. And I think with that, I'm ready for questions.
All right, and we have a lot of them. The first question, I think, Keith, is an interesting one. The question is, how do I move from the testing organization into a broader leadership organization within my company?
So I think there's a couple of ways to do that, but to me, the straightest path to that is to be able to understand and articulate what value you bring to the business in your discipline. So I think one of the reasons why there's not people with a testing pedigree in senior management is because traditionally people in software testing are really crap at articulating their value and don't spend enough time. They know a lot about their business, but they aren't able to translate that into how they're helping the business, achieve revenue targets, deliver services, all those things that do that. So one thing I would do, and I give this advice to people, is particularly if you work for a publicly traded company, go check out the company's reports and understand what the overall objectives are for your business, and then start to be able to articulate how what you're doing is contributing to that, and then as well being able to demonstrate that to the right people will show that you're there for more than just to do some testing. You're helping the business be successful, and that's one of the primary things I've always focused on, is being able to articulate my value to the business and how I'm helping them achieve their overall goals. That has always accelerated my path to management. So that would be my probably best and first piece of advice is, can you draw a direct line between what you're doing and how it's helping your business achieve your goals? Answering that question will probably be the quickest path to knowing who the right people are and how to impress upon them your value.
Great. This is an interesting one. For a manual tester, what would you advise that person should add to his or her skill set, for example, automation, QTP, Selenium, SQL, to be able to advance beyond their current level?
Well, the first thing I'd probably do is tell them to quit calling themselves a manual tester and just call themselves a software tester. On all of those things that they have mentioned there, you know, Selenium, QTP, they're only valuable in a certain context. So should you know, is it a requirement for a tester to know how to code? In certain contexts, yes, and not all of them. So I think learning information's always good. One of the values of, I think, a great software tester is not being so into the weeds of the technology that you can start to look at things from a different perspective. So you're always doing a balancing act of your own biases, your own knowledge, to determine, you know, how do I counteract that, and as well, how do I add the most value in this situation? So if you're just looking from a straight marketing perspective, just do a monster or dice search on software testing and sort by, you know, keywords, and that will, you know, probably 90% of them have Python on that. Are you going to be actually coding in Python or using it? Maybe, maybe not. But I think, you know, being familiar with those is important. But I think that question feels to me to be rooted in being a software tester that doesn't use automated tools is not a technical role, and I guess I would just disagree with that. Great.
Another question. What tools would you recommend for mobile device testing?
I have to defer on that. I'm not a mobile tester, although I can connect you to people who are, but that's not my field of expertise.
Another question just related to tools. How do you recommend going about the evaluation of tools or new tools that testing teams are going to adopt? What do you look for in a vendor provider of software testing tools?
Well, you know, we talked about this in our last chat we had, Jeff, around picking a tool vendor, and you know, I compare it to being married. Right, you know, you marry into somebody's family. It's not just your spouse or your significant other, and you know, that I think the organization. Do you feel compatible with them? Do they share the same values and principles as you do? So I would take time to get to know the organization, and having been burned quite a bit by other tool vendors that, you know, we weren't compatible, and then the tool we couldn't get where we wanted to go because like. Being able to support a tool properly is incredibly important. So I would do a lot of homework on what type of company they are. Are they literally just looking to, you know, push product out there and trying to sell the company, or what, you know, like, so that you know what you're getting in for the long term. So, and there's lots of information and, you know, forums to get that kind of, you know, kind of background checks on the vendors. And then the other part to that is like, one, knowing the organization, because you know, a lot of these tools, you know, I mean, depends on, you know, who's using them in what context. So having the right organizational alignment is important. And secondly, I would talk to their R&D team that you feel like when you've got, and not just their support, but the people who are like building the tools and doing market research for them. That will give you a lot of good inside information on, again, what type of principles they have. What's their forward-looking plan? You know, I've done a lot of work with some of these companies' R&D departments, and it's told me more about what I was going to get by purchasing the tool than anything else. I mean, other than that, all the kind of compatibility and environmental and technology stuff is all readily available on those things. What to me is a winner or loser with a tool is what kind of organization is behind that tool. And a lot of times, frankly, sometimes it's quicker, particularly when it comes to automation. You know, we've been focused more on just building it ourselves. And there's lots of stuff available to do that. So I'm probably less a fan of third-party regression automation tools than some of my colleagues, but we tend to build that more than buy it these days.
Great. Question. I got a bunch of questions on metrics actually, and what are the metrics to track. So what metrics have you seen being used for testing? Which are the important metrics for testing teams and testing leaders to be tracking?
Right. So I mean, this is obviously a hot button in our business, and particularly in the context-driven testing world. And I'm myself not being a big fan of the most metrics and seeing them just greatly abused. And I'll give you my short answer on this, and then give a little bit more color to it. I've never been asked for metrics from a customer or manager or colleague who I had a great relationship with. And metrics and metric scorecards are, at that level, at the relationship level, are driven by fear, right? They don't understand something. They don't have, the trust isn't there. So I focus on understanding what information that person, client, business wants, really understanding it and helping them get that information. Very rarely, and I would say very rarely, is that something that can be quantified in a metric scorecard. I like to focus on things like time, how long did it take for us to do something and why, but like really, and how often are we having to do something, but not in a counting kind of way so that I'm looking to apply targets to them. Just more as a first order, and as a great, I think it's Software Quality Management Volume 2 where Jerry Weinberg talks about first order and second order metrics, focusing almost primarily on first order metrics. And again, making sure they're focused on the information you need to get to your business, all this kind of test case counting, and I don't care what anybody in this business tells you around. I've seen people say you can actually quantify confidence through test metrics. That's just a bunch of rubbish. You cannot. And you know, and again, no one's ever asked me, Keith, when you get called into a meeting and it's like, Keith, are we ready to go? What's your feel on this? I never say 42. Right? It's never, well, we've had a 96% pass rate. That stuff's a big distraction. And again, I think the testing community loves to put this on ourselves and actually becomes a yoke around our neck to get to a better conversation. So I would discourage that. But the things I would focus on is time and effort.
Great. Just almost out of time, but a couple more questions. There is great overlap between QA and UX, particularly around usability. Do you see QA taking on UX responsibilities as the UX industry grows and matures?
Yeah, I think there is some overlap there, and I think a lot of the sound principles behind test design can help you with user experience. And I think, as I spoke earlier about emotions in testing and how that can be applied towards UX, and particularly around accessibility, I think there's great overlap there. So I definitely, as I spoke earlier, I definitely see that there's some boy, I almost said synergy. Boy, why that word popped in my head. But yes, definitely some opportunities there for overlap.
Okay. Well, Keith, I think we're just about out of time. We have a lot of questions that we didn't get to answer, so I'll tell people to check back to the QASymphony blog. We'll try to answer whatever we didn't get to in this hour. But, Keith, I want to thank you for being here and for joining us today. This has been a great session, and I want to thank everyone who came and attended. This session will be available on demand, so you'll get an email shortly with a link if you want to listen to the playback. And if, like I said in the beginning, feel free to visit us at QASymphony.com. Please visit Keith's company, DoranJones.com, to get any further information. With that, we're gonna put up the survey now, and we're going to close out the webinar. So thank you again, Keith, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.